Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to ask you to take your seats. This afternoon, we will be going through the ClimDev Africa Phase 2 launch program. My name is Edith Ofwana-Adera from the African Development Bank. We have two segments of the program. We will start with opening remarks, and then we'll go through a presentation on the phase 1. Of the ClimDev program. We will look at what it has achieved in phase 1 and what is planned for the upcoming phase later. After the presentations, we will then have a panel discussion just to get reflections from different institutions on phase 1. And the second segment we will then go into the launch of the ClimDev Africa Phase 2. And we'll then open up to a panel discussion as well. We'll get responses from some key donor agencies, and then we'll conclude with commitments and pledges. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us. This afternoon. And I would like to start by calling on the first speaker, the welcome and official opening by the AUC. You're welcome, Dr. Nyum.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Let me recognize the presence of all the dignitaries who may be among us, and of course the partners that are part of this ClimDev, who are the ECA or UN Economic Commission for Africa, African Development Bank, as well as the African Union Commission, of course, and of course the various partners who have also been supporting this program. We appreciate their support, and I would want just to say that I'm actually representing Her Excellency Ambassador Joseph Asako, who is the Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy and Sustainable Environment, who actually delivers greetings to all of you. And she's actually quite happy with the achievement of phase 1 of ClimDev. And among the support that, or among the achievement of the program, we have the Climate Change and Resilient Development Strategy, which is actually the guiding document on matters of climate change, which was supported through the ClimDev, should I say, arrangement. But in addition to that, of course, we have our regional economic communities and some of the member states who are actually able nowadays to produce weather observation reports or to be able to provide weather information to their member states, thanks to the ClimDev project, because it has been quite instrumental in that regard. And of course, there are also issues of policies that have actually been developed from the research that has been done through the same arrangement. So basically the achievements have been quite substantive, and they've actually managed to move the needle, and it's therefore time that we look at another phase. Of course, there are lessons that have been learned from the previous phase, which we have actually taken into consideration. But one thing for sure is that this partnership is important because it also avoids issues of fragmentation in terms of our approach to serve our continent. With those few remarks, I would want to wish you fruitful deliberation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nyambe. And I think you've touched on two important things. One is in terms of collaboration and ensuring that we can work together to make this happen. It's good to know that phase one was successful and that actually at the community level, this information is getting to the hands of those who need it. Thank you very much for that. We will now move to the next part where there's a presentation on the ClimDev program, phase one. We will look at the origins, the mandate, the theory of change, and the programming. And that will be followed by a presentation on what has been done in phase one. So I would like to call James Murumbezi to take us through the first part of the presentation. Over to you, James.
Thank you, moderator. Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, it's good to see a lot of the colleagues who have been part of this ClimDev journey with us, and also, of course, the colleagues who have been part of the implementation of the program. So what we are going to do, as the moderator says, is to first of all have presentations about the first phase of our ClimDev before we go into the description and discussion of phase two. As the director AUC just said, when we discuss phase two, we are really going to be focusing on how that phase two is structured and can be implemented as the main mechanism for the implementation of the Africa Climate Resilience Strategy, which was concluded as part of phase one. But just to get us to understand where we have come from, why we did what we did in the first phase, we'll very quickly go through a discussion of the background of ClimDev. So I don't know if we can have the presentation up here. Oh, okay. Is it possible to project the presentation? I saw it at the beginning. It was... Yeah, so just to quickly go through, this is quite a long presentation and it can be made available to all of us. So we'll not go through all of the slides. Perhaps if you could just go to the background slide. The next one. The next one. Yeah, there. So as has been indicated, the ClimDev initiative is a Pan-African initiative which is implemented by the Development Bank, the African Union Commission, and the UNECA Commission. And it was actually mandated by the African Union. We have all of the different mandates, including the Union and the Committee of African Heads of State. But it is actually, because its origins are around the mid-2000s, 2005, 2008, 2009. Those were the planning years. So it is, in fact, a product of the Millennium Development Goals era. and it was designed out of the recognition even then of the key challenges that were posed by climate change to achieving the objectives of the MDGs. And this led to that long process of design of ClimDev Phase 1, the main outcome of which was actually the conference on climate change in Africa in 2011, I believe. Next slide, please. And so the key objective of the program as it was designed then was to guide the effective integration of climate information and services into development planning, and to ensure the mainstreaming of climate considerations in policies, programs aimed at achieving the Millennium Development Goals. That's because the key challenge at that time was, of course, the absence of climate information and services, but also the very low levels of analysis of whatever climate information was available, and the low levels of integration of that information into development policy, planning, practice on the continent. Next slide, please. So the initial design, ClimDev is actually an unlimited term program, but it is designed into phases, where phase 1, the first 10 years of the program, was designed specifically to integrate the integration of climate change into development policy. And then this would be reviewed to look at challenges, subsequent challenges, and how they could be addressed by subsequent designs of the project. And so the delivery model, because this is a program that is being implemented by 3 institutions, actually specified the key contributions of each of the 3 collaborating institutions, with the African Climate Policy Center structured to generate knowledge and analytical inputs based on available climate information to support and inform policy development. The key role of the African Development Bank was to demonstrate return on investment in climate information in order to optimize new investments in climate information services, while the AUC functions and continues to function to enable policy formulation and uptake at the highest level. Hence, for instance, the Africa Climate Strategy and Resilient Development Strategy. In addition to supporting member states, would also support regional climate centers as well as the private sector. Next slide, please. So there were several fundamental assumptions which guided the design of phase 1. The first being that there was in fact widespread demand and readiness to use climate information and services for climate resilient development planning in Africa. Secondly, that such demand was not being met at that time because of limited infrastructure, that is observation infrastructure, and limited capacity for the generation of the requisite climate information. And where such information existed, it was not in readily usable forms. And that therefore investment in observation infrastructure would stimulate further demand and also catalyze the mainstreaming of climate information and services into planning. So then the initial program design was based on, firstly, investment in data rescue, which included the digitization of historical analog records, investments in the generation of climate information, as well as in the collection of improved climate information. The focus was on supporting investments in physical infrastructure, in human capacity development for generation, packaging, and analysis of climate information, as well as supporting climate policies and governance processes. This was quite an expensive program. Over the period of its existence, it was funded by the European Union, the then Department for International Development, now FCDO of the UK, Norway, Sweden, and USAID. And there were, of course, other funders that contributed to that program. Now, so this is the background and the context and the kind of the theory of change that was operated by the program. So we can go into the next slide, which talks about the main achievements of phase 1. And for that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, James Kinyangi from AFDB.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you, Edith. Distinguished delegates, friends, ladies and gentlemen, I'll take only a few moments, maybe the next few slides, to take you through some of the achievements of the Phase 1 of the ClimDev Africa Programme. You will recognize that in the structure that my colleague James Mrombezi has explained, there was on one hand the focus on supporting policy frameworks with evidence-based information, analysis, feeding into decision-making. But on the other side, as he had indicated, there was the gap in infrastructure to support the generation of that information. So the way the Phase 1 was implemented in order to meet this data plus capacity gap was that the Africa Union Commission with the Climate and Desertification Unit and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa with the Africa Climate Policy Center were responsible for taking the upstream use of the information that was available from the downstream investments that were being made in infrastructure. So we had a number of achievements in terms of strengthening institutions and providing investments in climate information services. One of the achievements is the Climate Change and Development in Africa Conference, and we have just last week held the 11th conference under this framework. It's a very robust conference that brings together climate change practitioners, researchers, government and policy practitioners in order to dialogue on the contemporary matters that are affecting the implementation of climate change programs in Africa, and also to build the capacity of these practitioners to be able to engage not just nationally within the countries, but also to generate that awareness and policy positions that would inform also international negotiations. There was also a robust climate research for development program that yielded a number of outcomes. And I was happy because the information that came out of the fellowships that were generated under the CR4D program fed into the IPC assessments. There was the expansion of the number of African scientists who participated in that, and I was very pleased to hear during the CCDA last week when we had the Climate Science Policy Forum that the participation of African scientists has increased from 3% to 8%. So I would like to believe that CR4D was instrumental in contributing to that process. Yes, let's give our African scientists a round of applause. Again, the area of technical support to countries, I think this one, in fact, is one of the areas where we spent most of the resources. I'm happy to report that we did really significant investments on the side of, so let me talk about two. So one, we had the regional focus where we supported the regional climate centers. Africa has 4 regional climate centers, the SADC Climate Center, which is based in Gaborone in Southern Africa, the IGAD Climate Predictions and Application Center, which is based here in Nairobi, the ECAS Climate Prediction Center, which is based in Douala in Cameroon, and the AgriMet Center, which is for the Sahel region, which is based in Niger, in Niamey. For the ICPAC Center here in Nairobi, we actually contributed to that together with other support from the African Development Bank through our normal, what we call net income allocations. We added resources to the grants that we received under this program, and we actually built a new regional center for ICPAC here in Nairobi, full with facilities to host scientists from the region, to generate products for the 10 countries that they serve here in the region. And we are very pleased that in 2021, the then President of the Republic of Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta, graced the occasion to open that center, and that center is operational. It's a very state-of-the-art facility together with solar panel powered equipment, and you are welcome to visit that center here in Nairobi. And our colleagues, Dr. Gulei Datan, if he's here today, and others, Linda Ogalo, would be pleased to share with you some of the investments that the bank and ClimDev partners actually put in that center. We've also done something similar for the Central Africa region in Douala. We have actually built a new center for them, and we're in the process of equipping that center and also supporting them with the technical capacity to run the center. At the moment, the installations are going, the Meteor Factory, the Puma stations, the high-performance computers, and my colleague Diodone Gudu is here, who is continuing to work with the task managers there to ensure that center is up and running. The Agrimet Seal Center, together with ACMAD, they were involved in the installation of what we call regional retransmission stations, which are essentially ground-based stations which receive satellite data. And these 4 ground-based stations which receive satellite data are the first to give complete satellite reception coverage for Africa. So we have one station that's located at the Space Center at Sansa in South Africa. We have an additional one that's located at Agios in Gabon. We have one at the Agrimet Center in the Sahel and one here at ICPAC. And those 4 centers are providing complete coverage for Africa. It will be the first time that we can access data packages from these low-polar EU-made satellites that provides us with the capability now to the outcomes from the regional approach. With the, thank you. With the countries, we worked with, through the regional approach, we were able to reach 25 countries with what we call the DRR portals and a number of other investments in computer clusters to assist them in building their modeling capability, but also through direct support with technical assistance, we reached also an additional 17 countries, and we installed 170 automatic weather stations in 17 countries, which is really complementing the WMO effort of making sure that we have coverage of 2,000 stations for Africa, which will give us a minimum operational capacity according to the WMO standards and recommendation. And I'm very glad my colleague Ernest Afesimama is here, who we have also just launched with the State of Africa Climate Report. And thank you very much, WMO, for that technical support. Let's give them a round of applause. Finally, let me say that also this support was very instrumental in providing collaborations and partnerships, not just within the countries, but also at the global level during the negotiations. The one thing that I would like to mention is that the ClimDev program really brought this convening power that we hadn't had before, and which was part of the vision of the African heads of state when they initially promulgated the program. So I will just say, I will not go through the specific slides for the achievements, but just to highlight some of those areas, and we can continue to interact in the specific areas, and I can continue to give you more details later. So thank you very much. I will invite my colleague James to come and take us through the rationale to answer the question, why from phase 1 to phase 2? Please, James.
Yeah, thank you very much, James. There's a reason why it's James and James are presenting this. Yeah, but thanks, James. there were in fact there were many processes of reflection and learning in phase one. Reflection regarding how the process, the coordination of the implementation of a program by 3 separate institutions was working. Reflection regarding how the program was interacting with member states and other beneficiaries that have been identified by James, but also reflections regarding the continued relevance of the program itself. And in this process, we learned quite many lessons, which led us to think or rethink the program going into the second phase. The first was, of course, there were the normal institutional challenges regarding recruitment, but also regarding alignment of implementation activities between 3 different institutions located geographically in 3 different areas. And I think before the COVID era, the use of remote interactions through, for instance, virtual meetings and so on was not that popular, right? So you actually had very slow coordination, but you also had different challenges in terms particularly of meeting at the highest levels of the 3 collaborating institutions. Delays in launching a part of the ClimDev program, as well as the institutional capacity to absorb the support from the program in different countries. Next slide, please. In terms of key operational challenges, phase one demonstrated that supporting the generation and packaging of climate information alone was not sufficient to stimulate demand and uptake in policy and planning processes. This is to say that there continued to be a gap between the generation and existence of climate information and the willingness to take this information up and apply it in policy making and other processes as well. So the demand for climate information was actually slower than what had been anticipated in the phase one theory of change. And so the scope of the program was strategically reoriented towards ensuring the enabling environment for the uptake of climate information and services. So even as the program was being implemented, there were responses to some of the challenges that were being encountered. Next slide, please. So these experiences informed the design, the transition from phase one to phase two. So as we have heard, phase one made considerable achievements in the first phase and gained confidence of our countries, RECs and other stakeholders as partners or as the partner of choice for climate information and services, as well as for policy advocacy around mainstreaming climate change into development planning. And also, ClimDev phase one has developed into a very high profile and ambitious program in the evolving landscape of providing climate information and services in Africa and supporting a range of innovative climate strategies. And it also increased the confidence of the African engagement in global climate governance frameworks. To this, I might add that there's always a need to put a human face to some of these developments. So some of the original designers of ClimDev phase one have also moved into those global policy making positions. So if I may, for instance, point out Professor Tony Nyong was involved in the design of phase one. He is now a director at the African Development Bank. So I think we attribute that to phase one. We have Dr. Joseph Insiful sitting next to him, who was one of the early climate scientists of ClimDev phase one, and now is the lead scientist at the Green Climate Fund. We also had other scientists in ClimDev phase one, like His Excellency Seleshi Bekele, who became the Minister of Energy and Irrigation Water in the government of Ethiopia, and now is Ambassador of Ethiopia to the United Nations. We also have our colleague Dr. Johnson Kem, who also came through ClimDev phase one and is now coordinating a UNDP climate change program in in South Sudan. Excuse me, Johnson. We could point to many other colleagues who have gone through the program we are now participating in this global governance framework. And of course, James and myself are still doing the legwork of our ClimDev. I just thought I would mention that so that we could actually associate the program with some of the people who started it. But of course, as I said, we also had challenges regarding the effectiveness of program management, particularly in terms of coordination between the institutions. And this has actually improved considerably, but the design of phase 2 also takes into consideration further improvements in coordination. Next slide, please. So the success of that program also created major needs which have to be addressed as the program goes forward. The first is the need to broaden engagement with the African decision-making landscape. And the African decision-making landscape has changed in several ways that we are going to talk to shortly. But also the need to capitalize on the strategic and operational opportunities that were provided by ClimDev Phase 1. And thirdly, the need to harness the comparative advantages of emerging initiatives providing climate information services in Africa. And there are lots of initiatives that have developed or that have collaborated with ClimDev Phase 1 in that regard. So coming now to ClimDev Phase 2. What is it and what does it seek to do? The first is that ClimDev Phase 2 is really a niche for supporting climate resilient development in Africa. So we are moving from Phase 1, where the focus is on supporting the generation, analysis and integration of climate information into development planning, to actually supporting climate resilient development planning and positioning ClimDev Phase 2 as the main or one of the main continental mechanisms towards that support. So as the impacts of climate change have become more apparent, the need for climate resilient development trajectories has also become more urgent. Phase 1, among other initiatives, demonstrated that climate information and services play an increasingly important role in supporting the emerging economic and development decision-making landscape in Africa. Climate information supports climate response strategies that are aimed at ensuring sustainable development in the face of this changing climate. Now, such strategies next slide, please. And there are numerous such strategies, but they include policy frameworks and investment packages to build resilience and to unlock opportunities for low-carbon, climate-resilient development. These include actions that focus on enabling long-term responses to climate change, so including, for instance, supporting national adaptation plans of action, NAPAs, national climate change strategies, national resilient development plans, climate change legislation, as well as the NDCs. I think we should point out that the Phase 1 was developed in the context of the Millennium Development Goals. Phase 2 is developed in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, but also the Paris Agreement. So the Millennium Development Goals was also during the Kyoto era. So there are also very significant contextual changes which have occurred between Phase 1 and the Phase 2 that we are going into. So a key focus of the post-2015 environment, post-Paris Agreement, post-Agenda 2030, is that the focus on low emissions development strategies. So ongoing investments in low carbon, climate resilient development pathways will increasingly rely on climate information services to manage climate imposed risk and uncertainty. So this means in terms of the design of Phase 2 that there will continue to be a need to continuously generate climate information and support its integration into decision making. But also weather-based risk insurance is becoming increasingly important in investment banking. And one of the challenges that weather risk insurance continues to face, one of the constraints is access to timely and quality climate information and services. Next slide, please. So ClimDev Phase 2 will contribute to climate-informed development strategies to support the structural transformation of African economies. And strategies will focus on addressing poverty, food security, energy security, water security. We will seek to catalyze investments in climate information services, or rather continue to catalyze those investments. We will continue to support policy dialogue for the effective integration of climate information and services into development planning, and also to support human and institutional capacity development for enhanced information generation, analysis, and policy making. Next slide, please. So I've already alluded to the changes in the post-2015 development strategies. And these strategies will require information on the intersections between development and climate change. Already in this summit and this climate week, for instance, we have been debating the implications of emissions for investment decisions. We've been having debates around just transitions, around clean minerals, and so on. Issues around knowledge and information on implications of development and investment decisions on the climate, the impacts of climate adaptation and mitigation strategies for livelihoods and sustainability. But also climate-informed development strategies will seek to combine development and climate stabilization outcomes. And this will require cross-sectoral policies and strategies which can balance mitigation and adaptation imperatives, which can build resilience, but also generate employment, and particularly green jobs. So before going to the theory of change of Phase 2, this phase is actually contextualized by an imperative to link climate actions arising out of the Paris Agreement to the achievement of Agendas 2063 and Agenda 2030, recognizing that these development frameworks are based on a recognition of the urgency of shifting development trajectories towards low carbon pathways. And that, of course, such shifts will be driven by the need to adapt to the impacts of climate variability, climate change, and resilience building. So we could go to the ClimDev 2 strategic framework and theory of change. Please, next slide. Next slide also. Next slide. Next one. So, the strategic framework for ClimDev Phase 2 recognizes that economic growth on the continent is heavily dependent on climate-sensitive sectors: water, irrigation, energy, transportation, food security, urbanization, numerous climate-sensitive sectors. Now, the post-2015 development trajectory requires growth to be inclusive, sustainable, but also climate resilient. And this, in turn, entails the generation, packaging, and delivery of climate information and services, as well as the mainstreaming of climate change into development policies and strategies. And so the CDA Phase 2 is actually positioned to provide these services. And this is what informs the strategic framework and theory of change of ClimDev Phase 2. We have explained the basis, the origins of this theory of change. So we will not go into a discussion of the complexities, but perhaps we can actually come to that in the discussion. So I'm told that we can actually wrap up at this stage and start discussing, interacting about Phase 1 before we actually go into the design and the different components of our Phase 2. So I'll stop there and ask James to come back to the podium and field the questions. So James, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The two James times 2. Been very, very impressive, I must say. And I think you'll agree with me that it has been very impressive. And why I'm saying this is not because the two Jameses are here. About 20 years ago, I was working in Angola in the climate change space. and also in Uganda. But the most challenging was Angola, because we know what happened in Angola. And they had lost 90% of their services in terms of the infrastructure, and we had to reconstruct the data. So if you look at what ClimDev 1 has done, reconstituting data, it is not easy. 2, there was very little infrastructure across the continent. And 3, the capacity. So I think ClimDev 1, you've done a very good job in actually ensuring the foundation that's needed for climate action. It was very impressive, and I think you'll agree with me, the support to young scientists who can actually contribute to the IPCC report. With this, I think at this point, I would like to call the panel. And James, I'd like to suggest that you're on the panel so that you're able to respond to, I'm sure, the many questions that are coming to people's mind. I have many questions myself, but we'll integrate it into the panel discussion. So allow me to go into the panel discussion, given that we have a short time. I think we lost about 15 minutes. And I'd like to call the panelists to come to the stage. And I would start with PAGJA. Do we have a representative from PAGJA? Okay. Sorry? Do we have anyone from PAGJA representing the institution? Okay, there's one. So please take your seat. I would also like to call a representative from the Africa Academy of Sciences. Anyone from the Africa Academy of Sciences? Okay. We will then go to Ilri Demise Tefen. Please do join us. Welcome. I would like to invite a speaker from the Africa Regional Office of the World Meteorological Organization. Anyone from the World Meteorological Organization with us? Okay, you're welcome. I hope I'll have some women in this panel. I then want to invite David Ombisi from UNEP. David, if you're in the room, please join us. Welcome, David. I would like to invite Joseph Instefil. Okay. We have a very small podium. Maybe you can put for him a chair there. That's good, thank you. I think let me start with this group. And if we have in the audience, if we have in the audience Andre Kamanga. Andre Kamanga, Director General of ACMAD. He's online. Okay. And do we have Friten Teshomi? I'm not very good with names. You can tell this, huh? Do we have you? Okay. So James, Charles, I will need another chair. Before me, we have a Manel. I think when I open it up, I'll open it up to questions from women only. You agree with me? Yes. Okay, good. So thank you very much for joining us at the panel. You had the presentation that was made by the ClimDev team about phase 1 and what they've been able to achieve in phase 1, and also what they're looking to in phase 2. Two things struck me. One is it's important for us to have the last mile. I heard a lot about reaching out to policymakers, reaching out to decision makers, and trying to see how can we influence policies and strategies. But the people who are at the front line of climate action are actually on the ground. the people who need the information to make a difference and to make decisions on the ground. The second thing, which is the last mile climate services. To what extent can we have ClimDev look at last mile solutions? Granted, phase one had to deal with the foundational issues of putting infrastructure in place, building capacity. But the people who need this are on the ground. How do we reach these people on the ground? The second point, and I'm raising a few questions and then I'll ask you to respond to them. Sitting in the African Development Bank, where we fund large projects in very sensitive climate sectors, one of the things that we require is critical climate information to inform the rationale, to look at what the risks are, and how can we integrate this in the design of the project. So I would like to start with my first panelist, Dimise Tefere, who works with the Accelerating Impact of Climate Change Research in Africa. How do we go to scale? How do we work with communities at the front line? And how do we go to scale with what ClimDev has done? Over to you.
Thank you. I think you have mentioned it earlier. One of the things that is really impressive from the work in ClimDev is especially rescuing the data. I'm a climate scientist. I work with models. One of the challenges that we have here in Africa is the scarcity of the data and as well as the quality of data. And in many countries you see quite a lot of interruption in data sets and so on. I think the work that has been done in terms of rescuing the data is key for the models and also even for any climate information services that we are going to deal with. So along this line, I think one of the things that I have learned here is with collaboration with the ClimDev and the work that you guys have done is to improve the quality of the services that is to be given in terms of forecast. We work very closely with regional climate centers and national Met services in here in improving the seasonal, sub-seasonal forecasters. And as I said, one of the challenges is the data. And this has been well done by ClimDev 1. And I think this is the kind of collaboration that we have to continue. Objective forecasting, I don't know, many of you may not, objective forecasting that ICPAC and other centers have started to improve the forecast. This is one area which we have been collaborating as well. And one issue that I need to mention, because you mentioned about last mile, is this is a key thing, because whatever information we produce, if it doesn't reach into the end users, it would be meaningless. So there are initiatives that have been started by WMO as well as the National Met Services, the National Framework for Climate Services, and also following this, Met officers have adopted what they call the National Climate Outlook Forums, where they gather stakeholders from agriculture, water, and so on. And I think we need to work to strengthen these frameworks, the NCOF, and as well as the National Framework for Climate Services.
Thank you very much for that point. And I'm sure the two Jameses are listening carefully. I would now want to turn over to Charles from PAGJA. Charles, PAGJA works with communities at the front line. Every day you see communities that are going through a lot of challenges. How do you see the work that ClimDev has done, phase one? How does it relate to the realities that you see on the ground? And what do you think they need to focus on in phase two that you did not see, given the reality of what you do on the ground?
So thank you very much. And I want to begin by mentioning that, this ClimDev partnership is an indication really of how SDG 17 can be achieved, partnership building. Having the bank there, the AU, and of course now the non-state actors here represented by PAGJA. It has been quite a very interesting kind. And we have always been saying that we had the Africa Climate Summit that has just concluded. and it has been, of course, praised as one of its kind, in Africa. But we have done 11, climate summits in Africa. That is through the ClimDev initiative. And I think we have really achieved quite a number of things. There are many fruits that we can actually start and say that we are proud of. But in terms of your question, in terms of what we need to do, I want to say that the world is now gravitating towards, rockery, red climate actions. What you're doing at global level, what you're doing at regional level must have a direct impact now on the communities at the front line of the climate crisis. And I think it's important that even as we advance, our advocacy, in that particular policy space, as we continue engaging other partners in the region, including Pan-African Parliament and the others, in terms of enhancing, of course, RIGO and a policy framework, to support, rock-related actions, I think we need to form partnerships also at the very, very local level, and with the communities whom we're working with. And I think at that particular juncture, we may want to specifically address critical issues, for example, financing issue. How do we ensure that resources actually flow to the communities at the front end of the climate crisis? How do we ensure that we raise their voice? How do we ensure that they're on the table so that they can also be able to contribute, to this particular process? 2 days ago, we had a meeting with the new or the incoming executive director of GCF. Of resources, again, from GCF, for example, we raised this question of the call for bankable proposals. Yet these communities at the front line of the climate crisis may not have that particular capacity. So I think we also have that particular window of raising the awareness and the capacity also of these communities at the grassroots, to be able to access such resources and be able to develop those bankable proposals. So I think those are some of the initiatives we can also be able to put in place to ensure there's inclusivity and to ensure we're actually touching, the very needy at the society. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for bringing in. To you.
Thank you very much, Edith. First and foremost, before I elaborate on that, I just wanted to mention that environmental issues and challenges, including climate change, cannot be addressed by one entity. They're too large. I mean, we all need to work together, to partner, to collaborate to be able to address the challenges. So it cannot be done by one entity. And that brings me to your question in terms of what can we do to enhance the collaboration, as we saw from phase one, and some of the achievements that were actually made during phase one of the ClimDev were as a result of the collaborative approach. And we have that in terms of the three main institutions, African Union, Africa Development Bank, and ECA, reaching out to other partners to be able to work collaboratively to achieve whatever was achieved during phase one. So in moving to phase two, one of the critical issues will be to build on to what was already achieved, build on to the collaboration that was already achieved during phase one, reaching out to new partners as well that can, enhance the objectives or contribute to the objectives of ClimDev, being able to not only reach out to partners, but also, as you are saying, the last mile, reaching out to the actual beneficiaries of the projects or activities that will be implemented. But of course, also not forgetting the decision makers, because as you move on in implementing phase two of the ClimDev, you would also want the political support. And that's the space where I work in, particularly being able to convene and bring together the key decision makers in the region, the ministers of environment, as well as working with the negotiators if you say you are moving towards the, the conference of parties, and the heads of state through the CAOSC, of course, working with the African Union Commission. So we should not be reinventing the wheel, but let's look at the successes. Let's look at what worked during phase one. Let's build on the positives of phase one, but of course expand the space to reach out to other actors that were not part of phase one to ensure that phase two is successful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And especially on your point about the convening power when you bring in other partnerships and how we are able to reach the policymakers as well. Thank you very much. I'd now like to turn over to WMO. We've heard a lot about the global framework on climate services. We've seen what phase one has done. We've seen the vision for phase two. We've seen the concern about how do we reach the last mile. From where you sit, what do you think has still not been implemented of the global framework on climate services? And what should ClimDev 2 take into account?
Thank you, moderator. I just want to contextualize a few things while I address your question. One of which is that national meteorological and hydrological services in Africa have been producing climate services, though inadequate, and ClimDev have helped to enhance the capacity of these NMHSs to improve their services, as it were. In addition, the regional climate centers are also centers that were established by WMO, and the support that has been provided by ClimDev Phase 1 has been very monumental to support that process. Now, you asked a question on last mile end users. I think I'm considering a paradigm shift from phase one to consider what I call community-driven approaches, such that you see co-designing and co-production coming from bottom top. That helps inclusivity, as it were. And also, this should be user-centered approach that allows for user interface platform with which to do much more activities in this regard. Well, I see that there is that lacuna in phase one because most of these successes we've talked about are not seen at the global level, so to speak, because while this phase one was working on an existing structure, some key partners like WMO were left out in the process. Well, I can understand it all started in 2006, but here we are. We're now in the box. The reason for our presence now is to further escalate what has been done, you know, the success stories that has been done to be further escalated at global level. This is also very critical for us, as it were. And one important thing I want us to see happen in phase two is to ensure that local communities, decision makers, and even climate service providers are well implicated in a manner that training and education is well provided, so that they also will take that to further level. Lastly, will be what we've been doing with the phase one as an organization. Beyond providing the climate information and services, we realized in the National Framework for Weather, Water, and Climate Services to ensuring that they are also implicated in nationally determined contributions, as well as the national adaptation programs. I mean, James will tell you, some of these workshops we organized, we really ensured that the action plan of the National Framework for Weather, Water, and Climate Services are further escalated at national level into these other policy issues that will further help in policymakers at that national level to begin to work for the development, sustainable development in the countries.
Thank you very much. You've raised very important issues, one of which is the co-creation, so that it's really bottom-up as well, and also bringing in some critical partners who are not there. I now want to turn over to the money man, Instafil, from the Global Climate Fund. You had for yourself getting the finances and unlocking the finances at the community level and even for regional member countries has been extremely challenging. From what you see in terms of the next phase of ClimDev and the importance of climate services, given that the impact and scale of the climate crisis is increasing, what do you have from GCF that you can tell people that will make people feel that access to financing will be much easier than has been in the past? Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Convener. It's such a great pleasure to be with you today. As somebody who has been part of the ClimDev initiative, I remember a number of initiatives that we did together, particularly the African States Initiative. For the first time, we had 1 kilometer resolution in all the African states in terms of forecasting the impact of climate variability and change on the continent. First time that ever happened. We also did some very impressive work, and I'm happy to say that much of the experience that I had from ClimDev is what has informed some of the GCF programming. And so I think in moving forward, I will say by beginning to articulate what we've done so far, at least from my perspective and the contribution that I made based on the lessons from the ClimDev. To date, GCF has invested about $12.8 billion of its own funds, in total leverage about up to about $48 billion, and 4.9 of this $12.8 billion focuses on Africa. So 38% of our investment actually is in Africa. And we have up to date about 228 projects, some of them multi-country projects, 18 multi-country projects. 92 of them are in Africa, and 72 of these 92 are under implementation. So GCF commitment to Africa is very, very strong. We are mandated to focus on Africa, LDCs, and states, and Africa has majority of the LDCs. And so in moving forward, we currently are working towards the GCF2, where we are mobilizing resources, and we envisage that we'll be able to support significantly Africa, LDCs, and states. We are looking at between 50 to 60 countries being supported with early warning systems. This in alignment with the UN Secretary General call for action on early warning, as well as the Strategic Africa Agenda, Agenda 2063, where it is recognized that we need to build sustainable communities and livelihoods within the African continent. And so we will ramp up these investments. We'll work with you. To date, we have about 25 accredited entities that are African and have been able to access resources. But out of these 25, we have only 10 that have been able to do that. But we need to really go beyond this, support the other remaining of the 25 to be able to access the resources. So what we will do is to ramp up direct access. We want to work directly with the countries. So we have over 100 countries that will support directly. We will also support locally led adaptation, is one of the main targets of the GCF2. And I think this is an opportunity for ClimDev2 to really align its strategic vision to that of the GCF investment criteria. Let me talk a little bit about the investment criteria before I conclude. One, I foresee, I envisage the ClimDev2 to have what we call paradigm shift. It's so important that we have programs that are paradigm shifting that will enable us to achieve the targets that have been set. The impact potential of those investments needs to also be very strong. We need to also enhance the sustainable development potential. We need to make it country-owned. Country ownership is very, very critical. The needs of the recipient needs to be articulated. And of course, efficiency and effectiveness is very critical in designing a paradigm-shifting projects to the GCF. But let me also give you a story, my story, about the most vulnerable in Africa. Yeah. So Liberia, which had no hydromet service, came to us, they needed support, and I had to depend on Africans that we have trained. Those postdocs, those Africans with limited resources and capability, we trained them to develop this project and support Liberia. So what I'm trying to say is that Africa can develop transformational projects, and this is where we need to really ramp up to support the capacity of the Africans to develop their own projects and submit to the GCF. So thank you very much, and I look forward to working with you on ClimDev too.
Thank you very much. And it's good that the next phase 2 of GCF will actually look at access in terms of at the local level, and also make sure that you can support direct access entities to actually get the financing. I now want to turn to my last panelist, but certainly not the least, Dr. Deshome, the Ethiopian Met Agency. And I'd like to say 2 things before you come in. I've worked with Met agencies for a couple of years. We started off as the information becomes very difficult to get because it's seen as state security, to now a bit of more collaboration. Where do we stand now in terms of access to critical climate data from the Met Agency? As you can see, it's very critical for decisions at the farmer level. It's very critical for countries as well in terms of decision making. If you could tell us a little bit, where do you see the role of national Met agencies in ClimDev Phase 2, especially in terms of making data available and making this critical data available to inform project design and to inform disaster risk preparedness? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. As you well aware, the Africa have experienced the 2 climate-related extremes. In one times, the flood, and the other times, the drought frequently. So to overcome these climate-related hazards, strengthening the observation network is very important, and also providing timely and accurate weather and the climate information for decision makers, communities at a grassroots level is very important. And to do that, I think it is better to capacitate the capacity of meteorological experts, as well as the infrastructure development is very important for that issues. So from Ethiopian perspective, when we implement the ClimDev Phase 1, so the access of weather and the climate information is very important, as you said. So decision makers should have to know what is going on, and also communities at a grassroots level should have to know. To do that, we have implemented focusing on 3 issues last in Phase 1. The first one is user-tailored weather and the climate information services. So that was very important in order to provide timely and accurate weather and the climate forecast for communities at a grassroots level. Another issue is enhance the capacity building of the meteorological expertise, as well as also the meteorological infrastructure. Installing automatic weather station, and also strengthening automatic observation network from this point was very important. And as James said in his opening, we have been installed about 18 automatic weather stations to get timely and reliable meteorological data. So based on this, we have historical data also. So having this data rescue issues and the digitization is very important. So this project was supported to digitize our data, to make the accessibility of data. So when the data is available, we have also used ground data, ground station, and by blending satellite station. So in Ethiopia, we can provide meteorological data with 4 by 4 kilometers using this blended data. And finally, the support meteorological service is very important, climate service. So as my colleague from WMO mentioned, we have been implemented global framework on climate services by cascading to the national framework on climate services. So with this, we bring different key sectors, the Minister of Agriculture, Ministry of Water, Disaster Risk Management Commission, Ministry of Health, and Environment Protection Authority came together and assigned the baseline assessment was identified, and based on the gaps we have observed, we have been developed a strategic plan how to address climate services, and for this we have been signed a coordination guideline. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. It's good to see that transition that has happened. We've seen a lot of emphasis of ensuring that communities have access, that they can co-create, and that really this information gets into their hands. We will have another panel later, so we will at that point, we'll open it up to discussions. Now I'd like to ask you to please join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much. You can have your seats. We'll now
that low, it meant we were in danger. What were we planning with? And so when we joined the African Development Bank, it was very important that this partnership was created. And so people ask, what was the bank keen, or why was the bank keen in this sort of weather stations? Our goal as the African Development Bank is to spur economic growth, reduce poverty, and anything that tampers with that or that affects the very existence of the African Development Bank. And climate change is one of those threats. So it was important that we joined these two other continental bodies, the African Union Commission and the Economic Commission for Africa, to ensure that this is done. So what was our role? Like James has said, our role at the bank was to hold the finance and ensure that investments were done right and ensure that we could actually leverage more resources. In this phase one, they've listed the people that have supported us, but we've delivered about close to $80 million to make real impact in communities where these climate actions and where good data, good climate information systems were needed. What are we looking up to for the second phase? We are looking up to a bigger, bolder ClimDev. That's what the bank wants, and I believe that that's what we're going to get. We are looking for, I don't know what you've agreed, but from us, James, I think we're looking at over $200 million to be able to deliver what we need to do. Let me point out, finally, people always think that adaptation is not revenue generating, so we don't have to invest in it. We've done very careful analysis, and we've seen the positive benefit cost ratios that come with provision of climate information services. It gets to about 1 to 24. That means for every $1 you invest, downstream can generate about $24. And so let's bear that in mind, what $200 million would do downstream. It's always easier to build a fence around a precipice to stop people from falling than to put expensive ambulances at the bottom of the cliff to rush people to the hospital if they do survive. So rather than spend so much money later trying to deal with post-disaster crises and so on, by then people have fallen, it's wasted money. I think putting money in ClimDev would help us to ensure that we prevent people from falling down the cliff. So on that notice, I want to say thank you. You can count on the support of the African Development Bank. We'll continue to strengthen our partnerships with ECA and with the African Union Commission and ensure that we no longer plan in the dark. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. And it's now my singular honor and privilege to invite His Excellency Antonio Pedro, who is going to deliver a keynote that will lead into the launch. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon. Dr. Hassan Aembe, Director of the Sustainable Environment and Blue Economy Directorate at the African Union Commission, Professor Anthony Nyong, Director for Climate Change and Green Growth at the African Development Bank, and my namesake, colleagues, distinguished partners, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be here today as we launch the second phase of the Climate for Development in Africa, the ClimDev program, a joint collaboration between the African Union Commission, the African Development Bank, and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And it was really wise to call this program Climate for Development, because indeed, we came to realize climate and development are part and parcel of the same continuum. The ClimDev Africa's mission encompasses a multifaceted approach, spanning investments in climate information services, the promotion of research and policy analysis, and the fostering of a collaborative platform that brings together a diverse group of stakeholders for action that you all represent. From the Africa Climate Summit held this week, close to closing now, a clear and strong message has emerged, which is Africa is taking charge. Our continent's leader, with the President Ruto of Kenya at the forefront, have spoken with conviction, emphasizing that the time for Africa to assume a global leadership role as a climate solutions powerhouse has arrived. Africa possesses the resources and potential to achieve enhanced energy, food, mineral, environmental, climate, and human security. And this is essential. All of these resources must first and foremost to enable us to meet our basic needs, as equally enable us to achieve structural transformation, reduce our vulnerabilities, and build strong and more competitive economies. The summit has highlighted that we need to embrace a dual approach. One, which is for advocating for climate justice at the international level, while also actively pursuing concrete solutions at the national and local levels in our countries. This is not a choice between one or the other. Lack of the right global enabling environment and strong global action on climate would lead to dire consequences for all of us, as Professor Anthony just referred to earlier. However, in the absence of effective strategies within our own countries, without our governments taking responsibility for converting the immense potential of our continent into tangible benefits for our people, Africa risks being left behind. To transform our continent's aspirations into reality, we must establish an ecosystem that nurtures robust metrics and analysis. Improved data and evidence empower climate-informed development planning and strengthening disaster preparedness. They ensure that climate finance and investments mobilized are channeled into the most impactful initiatives. Failing to do so will lead to our most vulnerable populations facing escalating climate disasters without adequate means of protection. They will be left far, far, far more behind. The second phase of the ClimDev Africa initiative is well positioned to attain these objectives by both capitalizing on the achievements of its inaugural phase and advancing beyond them. Amongst other goals, the second phase aims to create an enabling environment for widespread access to climate information. This includes the development of comprehensive strategies for communication, outreach, and advocacy, so that vital climate information reaches all stakeholders, irrespective whether they are at the center or in the periphery. With the endorsement of the Nairobi Declaration this week, we have a visionary and ambitious work program ahead of us. I'm confident that phase 2 of the ClimDev Africa Programme will be instrumental in translating the aspirations of the Africa Climate Summit into tangible results and realities. In concluding, I would like to extend my gratitude to all of our partners and funders who have made the launch of the second phase possible. You've heard what's our ambition, at least $200 million, and what that would unleash in terms of potential, and making sure that we move from potential to change on the ground. Together, we are working towards a future where Africa is greener, fairer, and more prosperous, where everyone benefits from the change that we are fostering. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure now to invite my partners, our partners, the African Development Bank and the African Union Commission, to ClimDev 2.
So congratulations on the launch of ClimDev Africa Phase 2, to all the colleagues as well who have worked so hard to ensure that this launch happens. Several attempts were made, and finally that day is here. So we are moving next to the next part, which is responses from partners. And on my list here, I have EU. So you're welcome to the podium. USAID, CEDA, UK, Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Germany, Finland, and others. So if any of the partners are here, you're welcome to the podium, or you can also pick the mic and speak. So I'll start with, I see Sweden is ready. So we also have the director for EPA from Ethiopia and Dr. Solomon from ICRA. Kindly join the podium as well. We also have Zimbabwe in the room. So as the other panelists come up on board, I think we'll start with Anna.
This one. Yes, now you can hear me. First of all, my gratitude to the launch of a bigger, bolder ClimDev. So, and ClimDev first phase was launched 2011, and then Sweden was among those who have been supporting ClimDev since the beginning. And since 2013, Sweden put about $9.5 million in ClimDev and the ClimDev special fund. To go to ClimDev Phase 2, it says that among the strategy objectives is to Africa's open access climate resource platform and information service. It's also to strengthening Africa's program of action on disaster risk reduction. I would put some reflections on this, that it needs to be clarified how this capacity development before in Phase 1 has contributed to disaster risk reduction and climate-sensitive national development planning. As you say, building a ground or in Phase 1 to jump into Phase 2, and how this can be connected on disaster risk reduction. It's also needed on coordination and complementary with other similar initiatives to achieve synergies and not overlapping. So as before, Wiser and Crew, and also Amivas. It's an impressive work done by the Climate Development Special Fund to build capacities of national and regional weather and climate centers. A demand-driven fund which supports implementing activities as to generate and disseminate and use of reliable and high-quality climate information for development in Africa. ClimDev Special Fund, the investment arm of the program, has put 46 million euros to modernize Africa's climate and weather observation networks. As mentioned before, ICPAC, ACMAD, and in Douala, the Climate Application and Prediction Center of Central Africa, to support the ECAS members, and in the south, Gaborone by SADC. The investments have been assessed as progressive and enduring and involve partnering with relevant national, regional, and continental institutions. For the next phase, also the synergy and is needed to clarify the work done by the Climate Development Special Fund and the African Climate Policy Center as the two wings of ClimDev Africa. It's also to take use of ClimDev in other framework and programs as African Development Bank's Climate Change Action Plan and the African Union Strategy on Climate Change, to further build deliverables of the ClimDev program. I'm looking forward to further development on ClimDev's niche on facilitating and creating, enabling environment for mainstreaming of climate information services into policy and development. So congrats to the new phase on ClimDev. Thank you.
Thank you, and again to appreciate Sweden with the support that Sweden gave in 2014. That is what led to the operationalization of the ClimDev Special Fund. So without that injection into the pool of funds which was there, we would not have been able to operationalize this special fund. And also thank you for the support that we know will continue into the next phase. So next we have Director.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Excellencies, colleagues, and I really appreciate that. Thank you for invitation of this important meeting where we are talking on the introduction of the second phase of ClimDev initiative. It's intuitive to assume that concerns about climate change should be preceded with or by the knowledge about its effects. That means in a well-organized and strategic actions. That means the decisions and plan we are going to have to overcome and adopt the challenge of climate change should be based on acceptable facts, data of best available knowledge, not only to address short-time needs of forecasting weather, the implementation of major projects in the agricultural, in the infrastructure sector, and requires high-quality climate data to achieve cost effectiveness and sustainability of the projects that we are implementing. So it's also important continuously working to enhance the national capacity to upgrading the expansion of climate monitoring and data rescue activities to strengthen the provision of hydrometeorological and climate services to achieve our long-term strategies on our development. In this case, you might heard of my brother, Director General Fatana, Ethiopian Meteorological Institute. That we've benefited a lot from the first phase of this project, the Climate for Development in Africa initiative, that it installed basic infrastructure to strengthen the climate information and early warning system for the climate resilient development and adaptation through the assistance of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa's the Climate Policy Center in 2013. And the National Meteorological Institute has owned some level of capacity, like meteorological centers, data collection centers, and to the level of capacity to address the gaps between it requires continuous support, but better to deliver its mandate. So that's place where the second phase, that's why we are waiting for the second phase. As it was highlighted by our President, Her Excellency President Sahle-Work Zawudu's during her remark on the summit, Africa requires its own capacity of research, science and data for action and our priorities, because IPCC is using the already published science that already available on the arena of the scientific world. So if we don't publish our perspective, if we don't show the world that the impacts that come into our tasks are based on primary data from the ground in Africa, then we will be losing the chance, and things that are coming will not be like in balanced view to the world. I hope this second phase of Climate for Development in Africa initiative would support this by focusing on the development of infrastructure and capacity for climate information and early warning services, by focusing building the evidence or analytical framework for mainstreaming climate information and early warning services in the development planning also. And by focusing communication, outreach, and advocacy, develop and implement communication strategies to provide climate information needed for policy-making process and implementation. So I think these are the essential. This is essential in Ethiopia and Africa wider. We are grateful for the support we received from African Union Commission, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and African Development Bank for their joint effort in assisting our needs. And I hope we will continue our collaboration on this matter. And I want to congratulate all who've been deliberating on this issue and realizing, to the realization of this second phase. I thank you.
Thank you. So from one of the beneficiary countries from the phase one. So happy that you got support, and I know it was not enough, and hopefully that through the phase two, we'll be able to provide more support. So next we had Dawit, and then we come to Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Leah. And I think congratulations for the team who have developed the program and also for successful launch. This is fantastic. So I'm speaking as a partner, and also I'm speaking as a team or a group which actually works across access, uptake and use of climate information services. And our goal is, how can we make, for example, smallholder farmers and livestock keepers the beneficiary of what you guys are developing? So by working at the grassroots level and at the subnational level. So I work for the CJR and lead a program called Accelerating the Impact of climate research for Eastern and Southern Africa. What really so attracted us to this particular one are the 6 pillars, which are really critical when it comes to ClimDev. And I'll just quickly go through them. The infrastructure and capacity for CIS and early warning systems. Investment around that is critical. And you have seen now discussions around early warning for all in Africa. And as such, if you want to cascade this, both at the regional and national and grassroots level, such programs are very important. Building evidence via analytical framework and mainstreaming of climate information services. I just came from a meeting where I was talking to, national meteorological services as well as governments and also NARS, and I can't overstate, the importance of building evidence and also decision support tools around that. And this is an area where we would love to collaborate. Governance and also policy and implementation framework for CIS and early warning systems at the continental, national, and local levels. Again, excellent area where we should be able to collaborate. Again, when you look at is Africa's resource platform, data in a very stratified open source manner. Access to data is critical. If you see currently in Africa, there are major initiatives which are trying to build integrated national ag data hubs, where we're trying to bring together climate, weather, soil, crop, agronomy, and livestock and market data together, so that decision support tools can be developed and can be used by policymakers to make data-driven decisions. And these are the things that we are looking for. And investments in this area would be beneficial for the country, and we really would like to team up. Communications and outreach to reach CIS to both policymakers and also implementers. This is great. You will be reaching policymakers and implementers, but we also wanted to reach by working with the implementers that you are actually working to end users, and such, last mile comes in the question, and love to collaborate and work with you. And last but not least, the partnership aspect for efficient delivery as well as resource use efficiency. This is excellent. We congratulate you and we'll love to continue to work with you as we have done in the past, and wish you all well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dawit. And ICRA has been a strong support, not just under the ClimDev Africa program, but last pillar on the partnership one. So as Zimbabwe takes the floor, I would like to invite Dr. Mithika Mwenda and Robert Singori to also join the floor, or the manual +1. And we can now exchange so that there's space as well.
Okay. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to really also express our sincere appreciation to the first phase of ClimDev Africa. The ClimDev Africa, it brought some of the real solutions, or it strengthened the foundation for real solutions to the climate and climate change issues, which are bedeviling the region and our countries in particular. One of the major issues really was the strengthening of the observing system of the region. We are now facing serious climate change problems, and predicting the future climate change, or the seasonal climate change, and also climate. I'm from the climate change department, so normally I say climate change when I want to say weather, right? We predict seasonal predictions of weather have been very difficult in the region, and ClimDev 1, it brought capacitation of experts to really improve their modeling to ensure that the seasonal forecasts are more credible, which we have really witnessed, and it's not something that is theoretical, but it's practical right now in our region and Zimbabwe also in particular. So the issues of improvement in data collection and also the data archiving and this manipulation is one of the areas that I would like to express our appreciation to ClimDev 1 through the SACOF, which is the Southern Africa Climate Outlook Forum, which is now quite strong because of the injection of the financing that has built capacity to our experts, which is a huge contribution. In Zimbabwe also, we've seen the development of the implementation plan for the nationally determined contributions, NDCs, an issue that I'm sure quite a number of countries would want also to have a plan to implement our NDCs. Since these obligations, 2030 is just around the corner, and from the meetings that we've been holding, you notice that quite a number of countries do not have the implementation plans, but this was made possible through financing under these windows. So we look forward to phase 2 as well. We want to implement not only the NDCs, but also the low emission development strategy. And we also have in place the national adaptation plan that now needs to be implemented as well. And we require really capacitation, further capacitation and assistance to ensure that we move forward. I think we are all aware that to be resilient, we need to prepare and to be prepared for these, for climate change. We have the issues to do with loss and damage, which is now an issue that is happening almost on a year-to-year basis. And without prior or mainstreaming climate change in our development planning, ensuring that the issues of disaster risk reduction and management are handled, I think are given precedence in addressing climate change, then would still remain highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So the strengthening of resilience, which is also one of the pillars of ClimDev 2, I think it's a very good, it's a welcome initiative that is now coming on board, and we are ready to take up that initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have 3 panelists. There's one who's online, Dr. Andre. We'll check if he's available to speak, and then we will go back to Dr. Mithika. But as they say, charity starts at home. So I'm gonna skip our panelists and invite my colleague, Dr. Jolie, to give a few words on some of the synergies between this program and the CLIMSA program. It's been raised several times, so it would be important to hear what he has to say.
Thank you so much, Madam Leah. Just 2-3 things. Number one is to say that this program that has been just launched here, when you look at the African strategic guidance, we see that it's really responding to what the integrated African strategy and methodology is advocating for. Number one, we're looking at issues of policy, where we're talking about strengthening the national met services. Number two, we're looking at climate services for various sectors, including area warning. Number three, as the WMO said here, we're looking at training as well as research. Number three. Number four, we're looking at partnerships, why we are here. And then number 5, I think I've finished them all. But what I want to talk about is about now partnerships with partners. Partners we have here, and some are not here, they're in Africa implementing similar programs on various issues, including on climate services. But the focus here is on CLIMSA project. The European Union is funding the African continent with about 52 million euros for a period of 5 years under the CLIMSA project. Under this project, what is happening is that critical things and similar things which we're talking about here are the ones which we are doing at WMO says, strengthen national framework for climate services, co-development and designing of climate information services, and several others. And then Sweden talked about here mainstreaming of climate services into development, policy and development issues in the continent. So what maybe may be looking at, which is very important, is that strengthening synergies is very important. And as Sweden says, it is very important that we really move forward with a bigger vision, a broader one, but without duplicating things, but strengthening and reinforcing one another. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
And thank you for keeping it short. So we'll have Robert from the United Cities and Local Government, UCLG, to give his remarks. And I'm told also we are running out of time. Then after you, we'll have Andre, if he's still online, and Mithika will do the last word.
Thank you. What the United Cities and Local Governments of Africa want to bring is the convergence of the role of cities and local governments in the climate discourse, especially in the African continent. And just to mention that cities and local governments are in the front line of climate impacts and where actions are much needed. Given this trajectory, UCLG Africa have been in discussions with the ClimDev partners with the view to having effective implementation of the program towards the last mile where impacts are. We therefore look forward to joining the implementation of ClimDev 2 with a view to building resilient and enhancing adaptive capacity of the most vulnerable segment of the population in cities and other subnational levels. This proposition also synergizes with the successful launch of the novel initiative by President Ruto just 2 days ago on building climate resilient of the urban poor, which aims to build the resilience of the urban poor populations in our cities. And therefore, this form parts of what then we'll do as part of mobilization in joining the ClimDev partners. Thank you.
Thank you, USCLG. And I believe we now have Dr. Andre, who will be joining us. Dr. Andre, are you able to speak? Yes, he is.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay, good. Now, I wanted just to contribute on actually the synergies that we see between ClimDev and other programs. In particular, we have the Meteosat third generation, which is going to become open. So we need to support the processes in the National Meteorological Services to transition to this kind of satellite. The second is now on the observation support of ClimDev Phase 2 to put some focus on rehabilitate the stations. We know that the efforts to mitigate emissions, but we think that we may put resources to rehabilitate existing stations that are in silent for decades. The third is the development of services using the Meteosat third generation and the new generation of polar orbiting satellites that we have from the RAR stations. So this will build on the investments of ClimDev and make sure that we capitalize on those resources put over the past year in this program, in this field. Today, we have the user interface platform. To reach the last mile, we need to build and operate user interface platforms, moving from what we are building at continental level to the local level. So those are the key elements I wanted to put on board. And then lastly, the support to the regional centers who have not yet been designated as WMO regional climate centers to go through this process effectively and efficiently. Thank you.
We also have Usman, who is going to talk on the national level, and he's also presenting online. So Usman, you have a minute as well. Yes.
So Senegal did benefit from the ClimDev project phase 1 to enhance its capacity on observing system and also to improve its service delivery. And I want to just ensure that and to mention it's very important for African countries because governments sometimes have a lot of challenges, ranging from education, health system. So it's very difficult for them to fund this important infrastructure to maintain the climate information services. During this phase, we was able also develop, increase our early warning system and as well our data gap. Senegal has many data stored on paper, actual paper, and we need to digitalize it and to type it. And we have a collaboration with the university, so students did come and make all the typing process data. We did the quality control. Also, there was an investment in the infrastructure, having new station, rehabilitating some station, and also acquiring some automatic weather station. The benefit for this is if you have better data, we can have better information services. When the African Development Bank did give us a station, we was able to increase our spatial coverage. And in order to have, for example, insurance company to come on us with area, then we didn't have data. We was also able to validate our model at local level. Because we are developing all this model, but this model need to validate, and the validation need to have data on the ground at very high resolution. There are a few gaps that I quickly mention program to solution. We have training challenge. Today, artificial intelligence, for example, is something very suitable for climate information, and nobody is using it in the cloud system. And also, medservice also to outreach the community, having some marketing, some communication expert, for us is very important. Also, focus on user needs. Many medservices have bulletin and a lot of services, but it really boils down to especially what is the need of the users. And that's very important. So, core production is very important to go back to the user and look at where is the problem, where they need to have services. Communication is a bottom line, we need to have it. To reach the last mile, communication is very important. We was able to develop, great collaboration with community radio, that was very great. And also sustainability is another thing. Projects come to fund, to increase, to show something that's doable, but I think the medservice should keep up. And we developed this public-private partnership with some company sending text messaging, sending voice messaging, and developing some services. And I think that's very important. So the solution for us is, first, we need to ensure that those networks are, developed, very well developed. But another question important for the medservice is their visibility. I think today everybody is doing climate change, all services, because maybe there are funding, maybe they are impacted as climate change is cross-cutting. But it's important for the medservice to
Okay, so
social network, and also putting a local plurispending. I will finish with this one. Local plurispending. Climate information is one thing, but it needs to be adapted and interpreted into action. And what we did in Senegal at local level, very district level, we built some community of expert extension services. They interpret, their action based on the light of climate forecast. So we give them likely what is the climate forecast for 1 day, 3 to 10 days, and from that they now look at it and translate it into action for the farmers, for the shepherd, for everybody working. So it's very important to reach the last mile, ensure that we have a local collaboration where the decision is made at the farm level. Thanks very much.
We have
schedules and the traffic jam. I'm not sure whether what I'll speak has been repeated. For us, as the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance and the civil society, I've always believed in the power of the ClimDev Africa initiative. When it was initiated, Africa was very fragmented, and for coming together, and the mandate of the heads of state was really to cure that fragmentation so that we have a stronger voice as Africa and international dialogues. The question is whether that has been achieved, but in our view, this was a very well thought out idea, because what we are doing here at the African Climate Summit is exactly what we have been trying to look for, really coming together, because as the continent, we have diversities. Some things are positive, others are negative in terms of really pulling other ways. And when I was coming in, I've still heard that being repeated, that we need to speak together, we need to think about ourselves, we need really to build the synergies, we need convergences. How are we going to do that more than this, the ClimDev Africa initiative? I think it has a broad mandate. And I want to look at the decision of the Africa Climate Summit, decision of declaration, paragraph 65. The heads of states request African Union Commission to develop an implementation framework for this declaration and to make climate change an AU theme for 2025 or 2026. I'm mentioning that because why do we need another framework? And already we have now ClimDev Africa. This is an initiative, and actually with the mandate of the heads of state. So I think this decision could have been made. We request the ClimDev Africa program, because this is very broad. Now the bank is there to mobilize the money. On policy coordination, we have the ACPC. On political, African Union, we have now the Commission. So I believe that now already the work is cut on the phase 2. And then when it comes to civil society and the non-state actors, now who can doubt PAGJA? Already we forced ourselves into the marriage as the de facto civil society. And then, so now that is complete. It's just to connect the dot so that we avoid that fragmentation which we have been witnessing. And really we have plowed this partnership, we can only strengthen. And this, we are participating in the development of this phase. But as always been in Africa, we want the implementation of the declaration and of this phase 2 implementation framework. The only challenge is resources. And I want only to cite and invite also, join others if they want, it was not mentioned, really applauding the Swedish government. Even when there was a challenge, before the vibrant team of Blair, the director, Nyambe, and the team now came to re-energize African Union, really we had a challenge, and that's why when we started as ClimDev, we had so many donors. So can we be able now with this energized effort, with the vibrant team within the ClimDev, so that we can now ensure that we live what really was there? I believe that we have not been able to really meet all the objectives of this framework. And if we do that, I don't think we are going to have any problem. As the civil society, as the non-state actors, we want to re-energize ClimDev Africa program and really ensure that we bring others so that we have a stronger Africa. We don't need to even go to do anything else. We don't need any other decision. Of course, the context have changed since a decade ago when this initiative was established. Is really to look and reinvent ourselves, and that reinvention has been done via this phase 2, and we are ready as the civil society and state actors. You can see we have now an UCGL. I think it could have said that every time we have been speaking to them and ensuring that we bring them into ClimDev, we will bring other sectors so that it lives its objectives. Thank you very much.
And that was our last speaker for today. I think what is the issue of partnership and collaboration, strengthening partnerships, mainstreaming, and the issue of sustainability came up. Despite the funding having run out, I think the project has continued to function, of course with the support of a few donors who continued with us along the way. And as Mithika said, they forced themselves into the marriage. But in as much as we are forcing ourselves into the marriage, I think we need also to, and this is what brought the challenges at the beginning of the initiative, the different institutions to focus on what's best in their competitive advantage, if you want to call it that. So if you're aligned to policy, focus on that. If you're mobilizing civil society, and that's what the strength that the civil society and the PACJA we have. If you're the financiers, you also focus on that. So if the FDB now develops policies and AUC starts to do financing and PACJA starts to be government processes, I think it will be a mess. So I think that part needed to be clear in this phase 2. So we all have our different roles, and that's where the synergies will come in better, and we'll be able to deliver. So with that, we thank everybody for coming in today and for supporting us and for being with